So those not familiar with the Owls' offensive play style, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so the last couple years, Temple's offensive play style has been a little different than what many would have probably remembered it as, I guess, during the Matt Rule years. During those Matt Rule, Jeff Collins years of Temple's success, their philosophy was very much ground and pound, control the clock, play hard-nosed football. They wanted to establish the run, and then they could, beat you over the top with the play action and kind of get their offense moving that way. And they did that really well. But the last couple years, even dating back to the Rod Carey era at Temple, it's kind of had to change because they just have not found success running the football like they had been under Rule and Collins. So, they've kind of gone to this type of offense where they kind of just want to establish the run, but they unfortunately usually can't. So it ends up just becoming a game of the quarterback trying to get the ball out quickly, just dump it out as fast as possible and, see what the playmakers on the team can do. I think you might see a little bit more of a return to the run first type offense this year, with the departure of EJ Warner having transferred to Rice this offseason. I think because Temple doesn't really have a proven commodity in the backfield right now, as far as a running back, it's going to be a little bit of a committee approach again until somebody maybe establishes their footing and gets going. But, I think you still will see that mix of the last two kind of really big offensive schemes that they've attempted, where it's going to be try to establish the run, rely on the run heavily, but, have the quarterback still be quick decision-making, try to get the ball out as quick as possible, because that's kind of what they've had to do the last couple of years. And I don't know necessarily if the problem has been fixed yet.
So let's get to that position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. You mentioned EJ Warner. He transfers to Rice. Quarterback number 2, Quincy Patterson. He's graduated. Forrest Brock had some game experience back in 2023. He went 7 of 15 for 60 yards and an INT. They brought in Evan Simon from Rutgers. How did this room shape up in the spring?
Yeah, I think what they were trying to do was they were trying to get a guy who was going to be a little bit more mobile than EJ. And I think that's what they've tried to go for with some of the quarterbacks that they are trying to bring in and they're trying to develop now. Because as good of a quarterback as EJ Warner was, he was not very mobile. That was not his bread and butter. And even when he had to throw on the run, he was not nearly as accurate or effective as he was when he was standing in the pocket and he had a clean pocket. So, Evan Simon and Forrest Brock both have more of that mobility aspect to their game compared to EJ. And I think that's going to help a little bit in the offense, where the quarterback can maybe get out and tuck it and have to run if they need to, and kind of extend plays a little bit more if they're getting rushed by, opposing defenses. So, it pretty much, obviously, it was an open competition in the spring, and it still is going to be that way throughout the fall as well. I think it was a little unexpected by most people that EJ was transferring, especially given where he transferred to. A lot of people view that as a lateral move to Rice, despite, Rice's recent success in starting to turn that program around. Still in the same conference though, and not really a payday was not really a factor, it seemed like, in EJ's decision. So it was a little unexpected. But I think, like I mentioned, I think they're just trying to get a little bit more mobile in that regard. And it's just going to be an open competition here over the next couple weeks to see who's really going to, take that opportunity and be the person that's going to step on the field with the first team offense against Oklahoma on August 31st.
Do you feel that Brock has maybe a leg up being in the system for a year, or do you think it really helps having that P4, practice time and everything else there that Simon has at Rutgers?
Yeah, I think definitely coming out of the spring, what I saw, I think Brock had the leg up. He just looked a little sharper. Knew the offense obviously a lot better, considering he had been, like you mentioned, in the system for a year at that point, and just familiarity with some of the guys on the team and all. But I also do think that Simon brings a talent aspect. Obviously, he had won the starting job at Rutgers, which you mentioned is a P4 school and in one of the top two conferences in all of college football in the Big Ten. So, Simon has something there that obviously Greg Schiano, who, had a stint in the NFL, saw in him that he earned that starting position at Rutgers. So I think that maybe the longer Simon is in the offense, the more he learns now that he has a summer under his belt. Maybe he will catch up, and that gap between him and Brock has narrowed a little bit, and maybe he will make it more of a competition. Like I said, over the next couple of weeks heading into fall camp.
Can you describe both Brock's and Simon's game for us? I know you mentioned they were a bit more mobile than Warner was, but can you tell us a little bit about each of them?
Yeah, so from what I've seen, obviously Brock I've seen a lot less of, just because coming from a JUCO school and out in California, it's a little hard to gain some footage on him. And fortunately enough, Temple had played Evan Simon and Rutgers twice over the last couple years, so we've seen him in game action against Temple's defense. So we've seen what he can be able to do. So. But from what I have seen from Brock, like I said, the mobility aspect obviously is there. He's the bigger bodied of the two, compared to Simon as far as his height. He probably has the stronger arm of the two as well. I would say Simon is more of the quick release guy, but Brock probably is the better decision maker out of the bunch. So I guess I would say Brock's probably also more accurate. From what I've seen. Now, granted, what I saw was a spring game where they were not counting sacks and some things were rushed a little bit and some early whistles and whatnot. So that's what I've seen. But I think, like I said, in the right system, Evan Simon probably could be a very effective quarterback at the G5 level. And I would not be surprised, if Brock goes out and has a bad couple series, if he is the starter come the Oklahoma opener and he has a bad couple series, Evan Simon's probably right there getting some reps then early in that game, because I don't think Temple's just going to lay down and try to lose that game. They want to establish some momentum and actually get this ship turned around.
So let's move over to the running game. Their leading rusher from a year ago, Darvin Hubbard, has entered the portal. Edward Sadie is off to Gardner-Webb. Joquez Smith returns and adds Antoine Littleton II from Maryland. How did that room look in the spring?
Yeah, I think from what I've seen from them so far is now they actually have some speed back there. They have some guys that have some playmaking ability. And you mentioned, Hubbard and Sadie, who were both solid running backs, but they weren't very much the same type of player, where they didn't have great footwork and they really didn't have breakaway speed. And that's not really too good when that's something that you are relying on so heavily in your offense, where you need to establish the run and make guys miss at the point of contact and whatnot. So I think right now you have that in Joquez and Littleton, because Joquez is a very small, 5'8" on a good day type back, very small back, but he has that burst of speed and he has some incredible footwork for being someone who was a true freshman last year and, was playing high school football, 8 months prior to him coming to Temple. And he made some guys really miss at all levels of the defense. So I'm excited to see what an off season of him now being in this system, working with it a little more, and what he's able to now recognize and see now that he's probably more familiar with the playbook. And now you have a bruiser back in Littleton, who has had a lot of success at Maryland. He was a guy that ran for multiple touchdowns against Michigan State in a game against them when he was at Maryland. He's a bruiser back, much bigger bodied guy. And there's some guys like Tyree Washington and EJ Wilson who Temple also has that have depth, and they're going to be on, all competing for snaps. Because like I mentioned earlier, I think it's still going to be a running back by committee until somebody really gets their feet under them and gets Temple what they need in this offense, and it's just as being a consistent running back who's able to rip off 4, 5, 6, 7 yard carries.
So last season we saw this running back by committee approach, and you said that's kind of what they would like to see, but we had that between Hubbard, Smith, and Sadie, and it was kind of just split up pretty evenly amongst the three there. Do you think that when we do see this running back by committee that it is that even distribution load, or do we see like Antoine more inside the 20s or inside the 5, or what do you kind of see how that stuff gets split up?
Yeah, I think definitely Joe Kez is going to be more of the every down back between or outside of the 20s, between the 20s, I guess I should say. And then Littleton probably will be the guy who comes in the red zone and goal line situations, especially because, he's every bit of 235, 240, pushing probably even more. They probably slimmed him down on the roster. And he looks every part of it, and his legs are just massive. So he'll just be a guy I think that you'll see in those types of situations. But we saw him a little bit in the spring, what he could do out of the backfield between the 20s, which looked good. And then I think Tyree probably is going to be the other guy that's going to get most of the work, probably substituting in for Joe Kez. I think he's another guy that is a big bodied back, but he also has that speed that I think he can just make plays. And you've seen that already in the works.
So who do we see get that first carry there against Oklahoma?
I think if I had to put money on it right now, I think Joe Kez is probably the guy that's going to start. Stan Drayton really likes him. He's a guy that they identified early on in the recruiting cycle. In 2023, they were able to keep him. He was a very productive back out of Florida, helped his high school team win a state championship there, and set all kinds of rushing records down there. Very similar to Stan Drayton, who is a running back by nature, and when he was in college at Allegheny, and obviously that's his position that he coached when he was at Texas. So he really liked Joe Kez coming out of high school, and I think that he's going to be the guy unless, barring an injury or something happening between now and then.
All right. Well, let's take a look at this receiving room. The receivers look strong heading into 2024. Their leading receiver in terms of yardage from 2023, Ahmad Anderson Jr. graduated, but everyone else returns, and they added Antonio Jones from Grambling State. How did this group look in the spring?
Yeah, I think they looked a little shaky in the spring. There were still quite a few drops, which is concerning, but I would also say they were shaky because they were very injury depleted in the spring. They were missing quite a few of those guys in the spring game. It kind of tapers back to the end of last season where they just had some guys go down with injuries. And they were playing some walk-ons, and even one of their walk-ons, John Adams, who had a phenomenal game against UTSA last year. He ended up breaking his leg pretty severely, and he's now full go. He's returned, so that obviously adds some depth to this team, but it's very much up in the air because a lot of these guys either weren't with the team in the spring or were injured. And so they were playing a decent amount of walk-ons this spring. Dante Wright's the only real guy that I got a real good look at this spring who's a returner. Zay Baines was out there a little bit, but he's had drop problems over the last couple years. So Dante is probably the most healthy and the most consistent out of the bunch. But a lot of the other guys, it's still up in the air as to who's going to be the people that really take the reins, and they're going to be the ones that are starting.
Well, you said that, some of the receivers were injured. There was a lot of like walk-ons getting some playing time. Did anybody kind of stand out to you there in the spring?
The guy I think that probably played the most and was really earning his time was Cole Sprague, who's a walk-on wide receiver. He really just showed that he could be maybe another John Adams like last year, where he just waits his time, and if some injuries happen ahead of him, he's going to see the field, and he earned that. And he actually started with the first team offense in the spring game, opposite Dante Wright. So that was a little bit of a surprise. Obviously, I don't anticipate him starting against Oklahoma, and I would hope Temple probably is hoping that as well, considering that they're going to be going up against a very good Oklahoma team in Norman. So, but that's what I would say we're at right now. It's going to be interesting to see the next couple of weeks, just really how healthy they are at that position, especially, and what some of these guys do bring to the table that they brought in since spring. You mentioned Antonio Jones. They also brought in Ashton Allen, who was on the USC track team as a grad transfer from USC. He hasn't played football since high school, but dude wanted to play football. Temple had an open scholarship. They talked him through it, and he said he wants to play football. So I'm going to see what he does in his last year of eligibility, and maybe Temple found a diamond in the rough with him.
Yeah, mate, that's something. At least jet sweep something fast, So let's move over to the tight ends. This tight end group is, a lot of people don't like to talk about tight ends, but Temple likes the tight ends. If you were to describe how tight ends are utilized in this offense to somebody who's never caught a Temple game, how would you describe it?
Yeah, they like to feature their tight ends, and this is something that Danny Langsdorf loves to use. He likes to use a lot of like illusion type plays where the tight ends look like they're going to be blocking and staying in blocking, or they're going to be just setting a screen or something, and then they release and they go out for a pass. And he has done a phenomenal job the last 2 years, I think, in utilizing tight ends, because that was an argument of Rod Carey's offense when Rod Carey was the head coach of Temple and Mike Aremovich was running the offense there, that they just didn't use the talent they had in the tight end room. And they had some of these same guys that they flourished these last 2 years, like David Martin Robinson and Jordan Smith. And I think they just did a phenomenal job at that the last couple years. And they've kind of really been the best group of the offense, I would say, in my opinion. They've been the most consistent performing. They've been the guys who've made plays when Temple's really needed them. And I just think that hopefully that trend is able to continue. But, I think especially how vital they're going to be this year with a new quarterback who has, who's going to need to get rid of the ball fast. Those tight ends are going to be very key in that position. So we'll see what they can do with them this year again.
Well, you mentioned those two big losses in this room, David Martin Robinson and Jordan Smith. They've both graduated. That leaves Reese Clark and Peter Clark as the returning guys in 2023. But the listeners and fans need to know another name in this room, and that's Landon Morris. He sat out 2023 due to the double transfer rules, which kind of sucks because now the transfer rules don't matter anymore. He was with Syracuse in 2021 before transferring to Utah, where then he redshirted and, as I mentioned, had to sit out all of 2023. Can you tell us a little bit about this room?
Yeah, obviously Landon Morris is going to be the wild card here. We heard a lot of good things about him from what we heard from practice last year, when he was able to, practice with the team, but obviously not able to suit up. We heard a lot of good things, that he's going to be like the next David Martin Robinson. He's very similar type build to DMR, probably a little faster than him, but maybe not as bulky, but very similar body type, very similar physique, and how I think Temple's going to end up utilizing him this year. Reese Clark, you mentioned, he's probably been the guy that I've pegged is going to be a breakout player for this team this year. And I know that's one of your questions later, but I'll go ahead and throw his name out there now, because he has just gone from a kid who 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever he joined the program, he was a guy who looked like he should be playing wide receiver. He was very scrawny. didn't look very quick, wasn't very sure-handed, but he has taken this seriously, and Stan Drayton has praised Reese Clark on his mindset and his maturity over the last couple of years of getting himself ready for this moment. So he's put on weight, but he's still a leaner tight end. But he's also a guy that Temple's going to run jet sweeps with. We've seen it in practice throughout the spring. We saw it last spring, and he's got some speed to the edge. And I think when you have that type of versatility at the tight end position, that adds a whole new dynamic to your offense that, you have to make opposing defenses account for that type of play that could be coming. So I think he's going to be a very integral part of this offense this year. Peter Clark, on the other hand, another guy who made a lot of plays through the NFL Academy in London, caught a touchdown last year. I believe he had a broken hand at the time, and he was wearing a cast on his hand when he did it. Just a tough London kid, very, very physical, not afraid to get up in guys' faces, even though he was a true freshman last year. I think he's going to see a lot of time this year as well, rotating in with Morris and Clark. And then the fourth tight end there, obviously James Della Pesca, who's going to be a grad student this year. He's a guy who's just very integral in the blocking aspect of what Temple's trying to do. So he will see the field a lot. You might not see him make plays, but he's going to be making those blocking type plays that Temple really needs to make in order to get that run game going.
Let's move over to this offensive line. They lost 2 starters to the portal, 1 to graduation. That leaves their left tackle and right guard coming back from a year ago. They have some guys returning too that played some meaningful snaps in 2023. Plus they bring in Grayson Maines from South Carolina. What are your expectations for this O-line here in 2024?
My expectation, or my hope, I guess you should say, is that this offensive line is going to stay healthy. I mean, this is a group that has just been absolutely depleted by injuries the last 2 seasons. It is an absolutely crazy stat, and if you want to go look at it, if you're listening to this, and if you don't believe me, but I think out of Temple's last 24 games, they've had 23 or 22 different offensive line combinations.
Wow.
In those games, and only 1 week has it been back-to-back the same, or 2 weeks where it's been back-to-back the same offensive line, and that was the early on in this past season. So just injuries, not performing up to standards. It's just been a rough go of it for this offensive line unit the last couple of years, and that is something that Temple desperately needs to see an improvement in. This unit has been pretty decent in protecting the quarterback, I would say. The last couple of years, I guess 2 years ago when EJ first started playing quarterback for Temple, he was only sacked, I think, 6 times all season, which when you look at that on paper, you're like, wow, phenomenal. That's a great offensive line. But, last year, I think he was still only sacked maybe 10, 12 times, but he was getting hit a lot more. And he eventually did get injured at one point, which cost him a couple weeks, and saw Temple have to play Patterson and eventually Forrest Brock too because of that injury to Warner. So they definitely need to be better at protecting their passer this year and allowing him to not get hit as much, whoever that quarterback ends up being. And they desperately need the run game to get going, because I don't think that if you see a very similar trend to the last couple years with this offensive line, Temple's not going to be competing for anything this year.
Well, you kind of alluded to it with Reese Clark as kind of a breakout guy, but if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2024, who would that be? I'm assuming Reese Clark, and maybe give us another one.
Yeah, I think Reese Clark's the one I mentioned. If I want to say a sleeper, I think just the rebound of Ian Stewart. Ian Stewart is a guy who transferred from Michigan State a couple years ago, earned a single digit for Temple. And for those that don't know about Temple's single digit tradition, the single digit numbers on their jerseys are awarded to the toughest players, both on and off the field. And that is a very prestigious honor, because those who earn single digits tend to be the guys who end up going on to play at the next level. And just, there's been guys like PJ Walker and Tyler Medikevich and Deion Dawkins and guys like that who have all Hassan Reddick, guys who earned single digits at Temple, who went on to have very successful NFL careers. So that is something that is valued at Temple. And Ian Stewart, we really haven't gotten to see what he can do fully in a Temple uniform since he's gotten here, because he was injured early on in his first year at Temple with a foot injury, and it kind of just lingered on all through last season, and he really didn't see the field much. So I really want to see what he can do. He's ready to go. I know he's itching to get out there and show the world what he can do, because he's had a couple years of him robbed now because of an injury. And I just want to see what kind of a leader he can be when he is on the field with the offense, and what kind of a difference he makes, just being that wide receiver who's a taller target, who's going to possibly be the number one big playmaker receiver.